Magda, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
You've written a memoir and it starts with your dad. Why did you make that decision to start with your father?
Basically, after my father died in 2006, I started writing, and that was the first thing that came out, was about his death. And I didn't have to struggle to find the phrases. They just really came to me, poured out of me, into my hands and onto the keyboard. You know, his life had a very profound effect on me. So,
tell us a little bit about his life and his experiences.
Well, when he was 19, he was in Warsaw during the war, fighting in the resistance, and he was recruited to be in a top-secret counterintelligence execution squad that was assassinating Polish traitors who were giving secrets to the Nazis and also telling the Nazis where Jewish people were hiding. So the job of his unit was to execute those Polish traitors. But he effectively started killing when he was about 15 or 16. I wanted to know what it was he'd done, and I wasn't sure whether he was on the right side or the wrong side at times, which is a ludicrous question now when I think about it. But as I was growing up, I struggled to understand where that guilt had come from, and I needed to really know that he was on the right side, and I needed to understand in a complex way what war does to people and what the legacy of it is and how that translates through the generations. And in order to understand myself, like the unresolved guilt that I carried for him in a lot of ways, I had to kind of heal that. And the only way out was through.
So how did, as a young person, this sense of guilt and shame about your family's history and about Poland's history manifest itself with you?
I think it just led to a sense of me constantly questioning my moral fibre, whether I was a good person or not. And I was plagued with questions that are very second-generation Polish sort of questions. I mean, I grew up in the shadow of the great courage and altruism of my grandparents who hid Jewish people and my father. And I had to then have my own, make my own relationship with courage and also in some ways examine my cowardice as well.
What was school like for you?
Boring, largely. Certainly in primary school, I was bored out of my mind. I was pretty much bored in secondary school. And then I went into a depression when I was about 12 or 13. As with the growing realisation about my sexuality, that combined with being dumped from the gang I was in at school and that sort of ostracisation that happens, but often for young people, but chiefly it was that realisation that I was gay plunged me into a reactive depression that lasted for some time.
How fearful were you that that would come out, and what did you think would happen?
I was absolutely terrified, and the consequences then, because things are very different now, although it's still not great, but then it would have meant complete ostracisation, and also there's that fear you have that your family will reject you, you know.
So you began to have career success over a number of years, and then eventually became, a very successful and well-regarded Australian actress and comedian. Did the fear that you'd had at school about your sexuality being exposed continue then through your adult years and through your career success?
Yeah, because, there was a whole period of outing for a while there in the late 80s and the 90s, as I said, things have changed exponentially in the last 10 or 15 years. But early 90s, mid-90s, it would have been a career ender for sure because, it would have marginalised me into a sort of a gay ghetto, and that wasn't really where I wanted to be. I sort of felt like the kind of talent, whatever talent it was that I had, was meant more for a broader audience.
You've had so many memorable characters that you've played, and so many of them have become household names. So let me just ask you about one, which is Sharon in Kath and Kim. How much did you mine your own experience and your own inner life for that character?
I didn't mine it in terms of experiences. I mean, I was playing baseball at the time, so I was obsessed with team sports. But more the feeling states, I think, just kind of emanated from me. I mean, the girls were writing the character, but that kind of forlornness and that melancholy that you can feel in Sharon is certainly a part of my nature. What do you think, Mrs. D? And that's something that in some ways I wanted people to see with this book, because it the brighter the light, the darker the shadow in some respects. And people have seen the sort of light side of me a lot, but not necessarily this darker side. And Sharon has those bass notes in her character, and I think that's part of why she appeals to people. I think that melancholy in her really resonates very deeply with people, and that vulnerability.
What about me? It is real. I've had enough. Now I want my share.
You've been one of the most loved, Australian public identities. You often come at the top of those lists of, who do Australians love the most and so on. Yet in your personal life, there's been periods of, as you say, depression and a lot of fear and anxiety and unhappiness. Does the public adoration in any way compensate for the private angst?
I think it does in some ways, actually. I suppose you're not supposed to say that really, because that's meant to be such a shallow connection. But in a lot of ways, I'm very grateful for the good relationship that I have with the Australian public and the fantastic feedback that I get and the warmth and love and encouragement. And I actually think that, contrary to public opinion, you can form a very profound relationship with a mass group of people that I think, in a lot of ways, mass communication, which is what thrills me and excites me, and that's why I didn't want to be in the gay ghetto. I wanted to be in the broader audience because that's where souls touch and merge.
So what happened when you did come out? How did things then unfold from there?
Well, immediately afterwards I regretted it and thought, what the frick have I done? Because I just wasn't sure how it would all unfold. And then gradually that coming out empowered and healed me in a way that I could never have anticipated. It really had a very profound effect. And again, my gratitude for the response of the Australian public. People were just fine, absolutely fine about it.
So are you at a point in your life now where you're feeling happy, and are you free from some of the depression and anxiety that your family trauma as well has brought to your life?
I think writing this book, it wasn't a catharsis in a sense of like, this big, overwhelming, outpouring of emotion. But gradually I think that's healed me too, in that I've gone back and kind of meticulously worked through all of the demons that I've inherited. And I've looked at some pretty dark corners of my psyche and of my family's psyche. And I feel now that I'm standing on the most solid, happiest ground I think I've ever been on in my whole life. So I actually feel freaking fantastic.
Well, I was going to ask some other questions, but that is such a good place to end that I just want to leave it there. So Magda, thank you so much.
Thank you.